Hi all, welcome to the fourth video in this series where I help you build a functional application under 1 hour using Locofy. This time I'm going to build a clone of the popular productivity application Notion using React, dndkit and Locofy. I'll guide you through the entire process step by step, ensuring you have a clear understanding of the build and design process. And with Locofy, you can transform your design files into fully responsive production-ready front-end web and mobile apps with ease. And in Locofy, you have the option to choose a wide range of frameworks such as React, React Native, HTML, CSS, Next.js, and Gatsby. One of the greatest advantages of using Locofy is its ability to integrate seamlessly as a plugin for Figma and Adobe XD. This means you can leverage your existing design files, tools, and workflows, making your development process even more efficient. And the best part is that you can export and deploy directly from Locofy without any hassle. Locofy also generates prototypes that mimic the behavior of your actual product, allowing you to test and share your ideas with others seamlessly. Now let's shift the focus back to building a Notion application. But before we start building, it's essential that we have a clear understanding of the entire process. So let's begin with an overview. The first step in this process is to convert the static design elements from your Figma file into functional components by tagging them using the Locofy plugin. This powerful feature allows you to bring your designs to life and to make them fully interactive. Next, we'll ensure that our design is responsive and that it looks great on all screen sizes. With Locofy, creating a responsive design is a breeze, guaranteeing a smooth user experience across various devices. Once you've completed these initial steps, it's time to dive into the Locofy Builder. This is where the real magic happens. The Builder allows you to create components for your application effortlessly. We'll explore how easy it is to create these components using the Builder and how Locofy's AI capabilities enable you to create components instantly. After that, we'll explore the code and dive deep into building a fully functional Notion clone. So what are you waiting for? Let's get started. So over on a Figma design, as you can see, we have two pages, one for the board itself and another for the drawer. So over on the Notion board, I have the heading, the titles and the description, etc. And also a board view, so that we can include the drag and drop functionality using the dndkit library. And then inside the card component, we have a heading and then an empty frame in which we can add a text area if required. So over on the Notion page, you can see when you hover over a card, you see a button. And likewise, we have added a button over here which does the same functionality. And when you click on a card, you see a drawer which slides from the right. And to include that feature, we have created a drawer with some of the parameters that you can include over here. And since also Notion supports Markdown, I have two empty fields all on the drawer and the main page itself to include the support for Markdown when we extend the code from the Locofy Builder. So this is just an overview of the entire Figma file. Next, we'll go in depth into the design of the board page. So on a closer inspection of the board page, you can see that we have a container for the board content, and inside the container, we have the description of the board that includes the title and the description and then the board itself. So over here, we included a Kanban board. Inside the board, we have three lanes, a to-do, a in progress and a completed lane. And inside each section, we have a card. So inside the to-do section, we have the to-do heading itself and then a container in which we have the icons, the counter value, and then a button which on click would add a new card onto the to-do lane. And inside the card, we have the heading of the card and a button, which should not be visible and only be visible when you hover over the card. And this functionality will only be possible using Locofy. I'll get to it shortly, but then we have an empty container over here where we can add a text area input if necessary. So moving over to the drawer page, we have a single content container and then the heading and then a separate container where all the parameters are included. And then the small container where the Markdown editor would be added later. So I have added auto layout functionality for the board page so that it's responsive. And remember that what you see over here on the Figma is exactly what you get when you extend the code using the Locofy Builder. You would get the same responsiveness that you get in your Figma design. So keep in mind to add auto layout feature to make your application responsive. So that's all for the design. Next, we'll focus on tagging over on Locofy. In order for us to start tagging, we have to run the Locofy plugin. So head on over to the Resources tab and go over to Plugins and search for Locofy. Click on Run and let the plugin load. Connect your account with Locofy. Once you're authenticated, you would meet the upgraded and updated new Locofy plugin page where you can head on over to the project bar and click on Create New. Give it a suitable name like Locofy Notion Clone for this instance and select a framework. So over here, I would be using React as my framework. And so click on React and then I would choose JavaScript and choose Tailwind and keep everything the same. Now, once you finish creating a project, you can follow the step-by-step guide on how you can export your code from your Figma design. So first, you optimize your design, then you tag your design elements. Let's straightly move on towards tagging our design. So click on Tag and select the frame in which you want to tag. Now over on the board page, let me select the title and give it a tag of input field and click on None since I'm not going to use any other UI libraries present over here, and go back and select your next element to tag them in order to make them functional. Now, let me give you a preview of the design that we tag right now. So click on preview and as you can see, the Notion board title works as an input field. This is the power of tagging over on Locofy. You tag your designs and Locofy identifies your static design elements and converts them into fully responsive functional components which would make your website much more interactive. Now, this is the purpose of tagging your design. But what happens if you do not tag a design? Well, so let's say this text over here would not be an input field if I do not tag so. It would act as a static text, which I do not really like since my application needs to be interactive and functional. I need to tag the designs and let the machine know these elements are input fields and these elements are divs or buttons, etc. Now let me go back to tagging our design elements. So let me tag this design element over here as an input field as expected. And then over here, the board which contains all the three Kanban lanes, let me tag it as a div so that I can make the styling of the website to make it responsive. That is, on a screen size which is larger than most desktops, the Kanban lanes can stack horizontally, but then on a smaller screen size, let's say a tablet screen size, the Kanban lanes needs to stack vertically such that our website is responsive. Now tagging the entire board element as a div would help us achieve that functionality. So inside the board, we have three other which can also be tagged as divs. And inside the Kanban lanes, we have a heading and a button. So let me select this button over here and give it a tag of button and deselect the disabled option. Now inside the Kanban lane, we have an example card. Now inside the card component, we have an empty frame which can be tagged as a text area input so that we can extend the functionality of our application more and more. So this is for the board page, and over on the drawer page, since we want our drawer to slide from the right, let me tag the drawer to slide from the right. Click on the drawer frame and give it a tag of drawer. And since it needs to slide from the right, let me give it as right. And inside the drawer, you would have noticed that I've added a component from Material UI. This is possible because I can drag and drop components which are ready to use from range of UI libraries. So let me go over to the plugin and click on drag pre-built components, and over on the pre-built components, so let me select the drop down element over here which I have added from the Material UI and click on edit. So the way you drag and drop pre-built components is just by going over to the pre-built component section and searching for the component that you want from a specific UI library. So over here I require a drop down button. So I head on over to the drop down and then I would like to see the options that are available for me. So I have Material UI, Bootstrap and Design and Chakra UI. I like the way in which the Material UI button looks. So I just drag and drop them over here. And that's all that you require in order to be up and running with the functional component. Now select your pre-built component and tag the layers manually or edit the available properties. Let me go over to the edit properties, and over here we have options where you enter options separated by a comma. So when I click on the drop down button, I would like to have the options of not started, working, testing or completed, etc. And for the default value over here, it's the drop down button. I have added as true status So you can see an interactive preview over here. When you hover over the drop down button, which has the default option of true status, you have your options displayed over here. Not started working, testing, completed, etc. So this is how easily you can create functional components by just dragging and dropping them from your favorite UI libraries. So now you're familiar with why you should tag your designs and how you should tag your designs. On the next step, you can edit the styling and the responsiveness of your website and also the look and feel of it, and also have a tighter control over on the website itself. So click on edit and select a frame which you need to make responsive. So over here, I need to make the board page responsive. And inside the board page, I have the container of the Kanban lanes, which needs to stack vertically when the screen size is, say, less than the tablet screen size. Let me select the board frame over here and click on the tablet screen size. And inside the tablet screen size, let me change the direction of the layout from horizontal to vertical whenever the screen size is less than 960 pixels or less than the standard tablet screen size. The direction of the layout of the board page or the direction of the Kanban lanes stack on top of each other as expected. So let me give you a preview of the design. Click on preview. So as you can see, as we expected, the Kanban lanes are stacking on top of each other vertically in order to make our website responsive. Now, when I go to the default screen size and reduce the screen size, you can see our Notion clone automatically changes its direction based on the responsive condition that we have set right now. So now that our website is responsive, let's add a new action. That is, when the card is being hovered, a small button should be visible, and when the small button is being clicked, the drawer should slide from the right. So let me show you how this can be done using Locofy. Let's go on to the edit styling and layout options. And inside the layout options, the button needs to be hidden. So let me hide it. And on hover, it needs to show itself to the user. So let me click on show. And let's go over to the card component. Inside the card component, scroll down a little bit and head on over to the child layers. Click on show all layers. As you can see, inside the child layers, click on edit the simple buttons so that we can make it visible on hover. So on hover, the button needs to be visible. So click on hide and change it to show. Now click on done, and click on preview. So now when you hover on the card, the button is visible. You can change the transition properties and make it so that when you hover on component, the underlying component gets a color shift and the small buttons is being faded in so that it gives a good experience to the user, and also it resembles the same over on the Notion. So now that we have added responsiveness and functionality to our website, let's go back to home and add actions. Now actions in the sense, over on our pages over here, we have only one particular action which requires attention. Let's add an action of toggling the drawer. So click on toggle drawer and select our drawer over here. And now you can go back to home and click on preview and select the frame that you want to preview on. And as you can see in the preview of our design, when you click on the small buttons, the drawer is being toggled from the right. Now it's time that we preview our design and sync it to Locofy Builder so we can extend our code. Let's have a final preview of our website. So as you can see, there are input fields and then components, and on the press of the component, we have the drawer, and inside the drawer, we have the material UI drop down button, which we easily drag and drop from. Also other input fields like we require. Now let's sync this to our Locofy Builder so that we can extend our code and add functionality on top of this. Click on sync to builder and click on the frames that you would like to sync. So let me select the two frames over here and click on view code in builder, and you'll be redirected to the Locofy Builder. You would be greeted with an intro to the Locofy Builder, and this is the file explorer, the layers panel. You can connect and push your project directly to GitHub instead of exporting it to your Loco folder and then pushing it to GitHub. So you can view your design running on live code, and then you have your Locofy generated code on the bottom. And if you like to add components and props over on your design, you can click on make components. And if you ever want to configure your framework or export settings, you can click on configure code. And then finally, it's time that you export your project either to your local PC, or you can push it to GitHub using any of the services that Locofy offers. So now that you have a brief understanding of the Locofy Builder, let's move on and create some components. The next step over here is to create components in order for us to reuse certain components repeatedly in our application. So let me go over to the board page, and inside the board page, the design elements which are suitable to make as components would be the Kanban lane and the Kanban card components. So let me quickly create them as components. So let me click on create and let me choose the card component and click on make component and click on create. It's as simple as that to create a component over here on Locofy Builder. Since I would like to add the heading of the card as a value prop, so click on the value props button and then click on the title and then the value attribute, and the default value would be enter a task. Save. Done. So now that I have added the card as a component, let me go over to the other Kanban lanes and click on card. And instead of creating a new component, let me choose the existing card component. Let me do it for the other component as well. So now let me add the Kanban lane component since it's repeating thrice in our page. Let me select the component and click on make component and give it a suitable name. So let me give it Kanban lane component, create, and let me add some value props over here. So the heading, inside the heading, the frame, the value of the to do element should be passed as a value prop. So inside the Kanban lane, the to do as the value and the default value would be task. Now let me reuse the component over on the other Kanban lanes as well. As you can see, in a matter of few minutes, we were able to create components that would make our code readable and reusable in the long time. So now that we have our components in place, let's click on sync and export and click on export project. And over on the export project, take a look at all the settings and confirm if they are all right, and then click on confirm code export. Now you can open your project folder in your favorite IDE and get started in extending the functionality of your application. So right now I have opened the project folder in my favorite IDE, that is VS Code. So let's get comfortable with the code structure. So over on the source directory, we have the pages folder and the components folder. And over on the pages folder, we have the Kanban board itself. And in the components folder, we have the card component, which we made using the Locofy Builder, and the drawer component, and the Kanban lane, which we again made it using the Locofy Builder, and the portal drawer component. These are the components which we really need and are essential for our design. Now let's open up the terminal and install the node modules. So npm install. And then once you install your node modules, we can go over and start the application. So enter npm start and application runs perfectly fine in the web. So we can now move on and extend the functionality of our application by adding the following features. From the original Notion application, we can see that the text fields over here should be able to be editable. And so we need to change the text fields to store data. So we need to modify the input fields over on our application. And then we need to add the drag and drop functionality also in our application. And finally, we need to add support for Markdown. So these are the three main features that we need to add over in our application. So let's move on and start building our application by extending the functionality of the drag and drop component. To begin with, let me start by adding the drag and drop functionality first. So in order to add the drag and drop functionality, we need to install the DND kit, which is available on the DND kit website. Let me install DND kit. Once the DND kit library is installed, we can start importing hooks from the DND kit library. Let me start by importing use draggable hook, and then let me import CSS from DND kit utilities. Let me create an instance of the use draggable hook by extracting some of the variables which are returned from the use draggable hook. So attributes, listeners, set node ref, and transform are some of the attributes which are returned from the use draggable hook. And to pass the use draggable hook, we may require an ID. So over here, let me add card title and then pass in a unique identification, which we would pass it as props from the Kanban lane. So let me include UID over here. And not only UID, we require to add a property of data, which should be useful for us to add the drag and drop functionality. So inside the data object, let me pass the card title, index, and a parent property, and then the UID. Let me add all three of them over on the card as props, since we would be passing them from the Kanban lane. Now in order to use the CSS utility from the dnd-kit library, let me define a constant style, and inside the style constant, let me pass the transform property css.transform to string of transform. We should pass the location of the card component to the transform property, and the values that we have dereferenced from the use draggable hook would be used down in the component. So over here, let me add it over in the div, a reference node ref, and for style, it would be the style constant. Let me remove this and then spread all the attributes and spread all the listeners. And then to top it all, let me create an on-click function which would handle the card click, and I'll define the handle card click function over on the top. And inside the handle card click, I need to check if the card is not being dragged right now and the card is not being edited right now. If so, we'll allow the isEditable variable to be true. Now let's define isEditable and isDragging on top. Now let me create another variable using the useState hook to store the title of the card. So over here, let me name it as title and set title, and the same useState hook. But over here, let me add the card title prop as the initial value for the title variable. And then over on the input field, let me edit the placeholder text and add value. And inside the value, let me pass the title variable. And if the title variable is not present, then we'll pass the card title prop itself. And in order for us to remove the post the video value prop, which is not required because we have added the card title as prop, we'll remove it over here and remove the max and min length since it requires a number, and then create a function which should modify the value of the input field. So let me give it handle input change as a function name and define it and pass the value of the target element to the set title function. So the input field over here should only be editable when the mouse pointer is hovering over the card. So let me wrap the input field and add conditions to it. So let me add is editable, or let's say it's also hoverable. So is hoverable, and if either one of them are true, we can have the input field to be editable. But if both of them are not true, then we can just pass in a span element where the content would be either the title or the card title. So when the card is being rendered, only when the user hovers over the card, the input field would be able to be editable, or else it would just show the value of the card title as text. Now we need to define the isHoverable variable. So let me go over back to the top and create a useState hook and set it as false initially. Now in order for us to detect if the mouse pointer is over the card, let me go back to the initial div over here and add two functions, on mouse enter and on mouse leave. So on mouse enter, we can handle it by calling handle card hover, and then on mouse leave, let me add handle card leave. Now let me define both of these functions over here, handle card hover, and when the handle card function is being called, we need to set the is hoverable variable to be true, and if the mouse pointer is leaving the card component, then we need to set the hoverable variable to false. Now if the input field also loses focus, that is on blur, we need to handle it. So let me define a function handle input blur and define it over here. And when the input field is being lost focus, that means we need to change the editable and the draggable variables to false. So let me set the editable and the draggable variables to be false. And one thing to keep in mind is that we're not using use callback functions over here. So let me just fix it. And when we use callback functions, we need to pass the variables which would trigger the re-render. So for the handle cart click, it would be is dragging and is editable. And for the input change, it would be the e.target value. So target.value. And for hover, so over here the handle cart hover doesn't really have any dependency. So let me give it an empty array. And for same, the leave function would also not have any dependency, which would trigger the re-render function. And finally, the input blur would also not have any dependency, which would call the use callback hook. So then we'll go over to the button, which on click or double click over here will make the drawer slide from the right. So let me go over to the button and click on double click and add an on double click property instead of the on click. Since we are using the on-click property already over on the cart component, we'll use on double click over here since we do not require any misclicks which would trigger the drawer itself. So let me give it an handle double click function and then define it on the top. And since we want the drawer to slide from the right when the button is being double clicked, let's set the drawer to be open by passing in true to the set drawer open function, which was already defined by Locofy for us. Now finally, you would remember that we had a text area when we designed a Figma file, but thinking right now, I find little to no use case to include the text area over here for this particular demo. But if you would like to add the text area, you may do so. So I'm commenting it out and saving. So let me go to the local website and we can see that we have a few errors. So over here, reading toString. Okay, all right. So since we're passing the transform CSS object to a string variable, we're not really calling the toString function, but over here we are calling the toString function. So the problem must be from the transform. Since the transform variable is of the type transform with a capital T, we need to add the object capital T over here. And so right now, and we get another error. So E is not defined. So it must be a problem over here in some of my function. So I had a pretty big mistake over here. Let me comment it out, remove it, and then pass the set title and pass the event object over here. So I think I might have found the error. So the event is actually not triggering. So let me leave it as blank over here and that should solve the error, right? It has solved the error. And then the node ref should have been dereferenced from the use draggable hook, but over here I have passed it as set node ref. So let me copy the set node ref reference and pass it as a reference over here. And then as you can see, you can edit the input field when we hover on the card as expected. And when we do not hover on the card, we can see that it changes into a normal text. And when we hover on it again, we can edit the card as expected. So next, let's move over to the Kanban lane and extend the functionality. Now, moving on to the Kanban lane component, let's start extending the functionality of it. So first, let's move on to the input tag, and over on the input tag, let me remove the placeholder value. Let me change the value of the task name, and so let me just remove the prop itself, and then inside the value, let me give it as title, and then create a useState hook on top of it. So let's create a new useState hook, a constant variable name called as title, and a function to set title. But for this useState hook, the title of the Kanban lane is being passed down as props. Let me add a prop over here as title, which should be later on passed from the Kanban board, and then we'll use this as the value. Okay, it's going to be the same name, so let me edit it as title lane and change it to title lane. Alright, now let me remove the minimum and maximum length properties, which we do not require over here, and just add an on change property inside which let me set the title lane to the value of the input field. And so our application works right now. Alright, so it's now successful. Once the input field is done, let's go over on the top. Let's import the use droppable hook. from D&D kit and use the use droppable hook. And let me dereference the node reference property using the use droppable hook. And inside the use droppable hook, I'm passing the ID as the title parameter that was passed from the board. And after using the use droppable hook, let me go over to the button component. Over on the button component, when the button is being clicked, a new card must be added on the Kanban lane. So let me add a new property called as onClick and give it a function name of onClick handle, and let me define it up top. Now inside the onClick handle function, let me pass on a function called as add card, and this function must be passed on from the Kanban board since a card component from a single Kanban lane would be unique to the Kanban lane itself. So since we have three Kanban lanes and we would be passing on the same component for three other separate Kanban lanes, we need to pass the add card function as a property over here. Now not only add card, but I also want to add a property called as set card from the same Kanban board component. And let me just define the set card function for now, but I'll not add any functionality right now. And then also from the Kanban board component, I also need to add a new prop called as items, which would contain the list of new cards that has been added over on the Kanban lane. Now you might not understand it right now, but in the next part, when I build the Kanban board component, you would come to understand all the props that I am defining right now. Now let me go on to the div where the card component is being rendered. Now over here, the card component is being only rendered once, but I want to render the card component based on the number of items that are present in the list. And the list is the items property that I have passed right now. Let me iterate through the items list, and inside the items list, I have the title property. And from the title property, I'll dereference a card name value and the UID of the title property. And then also we require a key value. So let me pass in index as a key value. For each iteration of the items array, I must render the card component and pass on the respective props. So require the card title, which is the card name, which has been destructured from the title property. And then for the set card property, I may pass the set card. Let me ensure that I have the set card property over on the card component. Since I don't, let me add the set card. And then for the key, it must be the index. And for the UID, the destructured UID value. And the index is the index itself. And the parent would be the title property. And let me also pass a new property called as add new card, where I'll pass in a new function add new card, which I'll define on top of this. So I'll add the parent prop, and for the parent, let me pass the title property as a parameter and then click on save. Now I have an error in line 12. Now set card is not a property of the Kanban lane, but of the Kanban card. So let me remove it, and so it should work fine. Now for the error, when I go to the console and see, I haven't yet defined the useState hook. So let me do that and then see that it cannot read the properties of the undefined, which is the map variable, since I don't really have an items list right now. So this error can be mitigated in the next part where I extend the functionality of the Kanban board itself. So that is why the main logic or the drag and drop functionality exists. So now let's head on over to the Kanban board component and extend the functionality of it. Alright, so let's move on to the Kanban board right now. So over on the Kanban board, you have to first import some components from the D&D kit. So let me import the D&D context component, D&D kit library, and also let me import rectangular intersection, and then let's wrap the entire div component over here with the D&D context that we right now imported. Let us have three useState hooks to store the items of the respective Kanban lanes type of list. Let me copy and paste it to three items. So to-do list, and then a completed list, and then in progress elements. Let me have everything in camel case. Now if you remember, we had added a prop in the Kanban lane component called as add card. So we must define the add card component over on the Kanban board. And since we have three lanes, we have three add card functions. First we have the add to do function, which takes in title as a parameter. And then inside the set to do items, let me spread the existing to-do items and append the new card at the end. And to give a random number, unique number to the UID, let me use the date module in JavaScript, and let me copy the add to do function and reuse it for other Kanban lanes. Alright, now let's add these items variable and the add card functions to a Kanban component as props. So let me add card function as add in progress, and the items prop would be the in progress items. Same over here. Add card would be the completed and the done items. Now if you remember, we had actually added 3 extra props other than the Locofy generated props. That includes the title prop as well. So let me pass the title and give it a string of to do and change the add card function to add to do and the items to do items. And similarly, let me copy the title prop and add to other Kanban line components as well. Now let's go over and have a quick preview. It says that useState is not defined. So let us define the useState hook. Great. So we can see that the new card components are being added and the drag and drop functionality has started to work, but still we do not have any logic, so the drag and drop functionality does not work as intended. So let's build the logic of the drag and drop functionality. So over on the DND context component, let me first define the collision detector. So over here we'll be using the rectangular intersection collision detector that we imported from the DND kit library, and I will be passing the on drag and function which is available in the DND context component. So I'll pass the event as props and then store the name of the Kanban lane on which the current card component has been dropped, and then let me store the title as well, and then the index and the parent element and the UID. So index, parent and the UID. So in order to get the title of the component, I have to use the active property, and inside the active property we would have the data property. Inside the data property, we have the current property and the card title property. In case you're wondering how I know all this stuff, you can just console.log the event variable, and then when you look over on the console, you'll see the JSON object, and then you can take a note of it and then dereference the properties over here. In case the card title has not been passed and is actually a null value, then the default value of enter a task would be visible to the users. So let me fill everything. And for you to see the JSON object, let me console.log the event object and then go to the console. And you can see inside the event object, we have the active property, and inside the active property, we have the data, and inside the data, we have the current, and inside the current card title. This is exactly what we have dereferenced over here and stored it in the title variable. Since we have not yet given a title for the card component, it's showing as undefined, but once we start working on the logic, the Kanban board would work as intended. So once you store all these values, let's start with the logic. So first of all, if the container or the parent is null or being defined a null value, then there is no use in executing a function. So if the container or parent is not true, then we return back exiting the function. And if the container is the same as the parent container, that is, if the card has been dropped on the same container that it was previously stored in, then we return back to. Since we don't really want to add or remove any card from the respective Kanban lanes, we return back and exit the function. And then let me define a temporary data and give it as null for now. You'll understand why I'm doing it once I start working on the operations. So first of all, we have to remove the card component from the parent container and then store it in the container which the card component has been dropped. So let's start working on the removing part of it. So we have to remove from the parent container. So let me check if the parent is from the to-do container, then we have to remove it from the to-do items list. So the data that we are going to remove, let me store it in the temp variable, the index, and then let me use the set to do items and pass the to do items, but only until the index value. So from 0 till the index value, that is the value that is just before the index or the current card that was removed from the parent container. And then we should also append the data that is after the card component which was moved away from the parent container. So let me add to do items slice and everything. And we'll use the same logic for the other containers. So if the parent is an in progress container, then we change set done items and then to in progress items, same over here. And then when we change the parent to the final component, that is the completed component, change to done items. Over here it's set done items, but over here it should be set in progress items. All right. So yep. So this is the logic for removing the card component. Now let me add the logic for adding the card component which was removed from the parent container. So the container in which the card has been dropped is the to do container. We must first check which is being dropped over here already exists. So let me just define an is existing variable and check if any item over here on the items list has the same UID of the current card which is being dropped into the to do container. Now if the isExisting variable is false, if it does not contain a duplicate card already inside the container, we use a set to do items set state hook to again append the current card which was removed from the parent container. So the card which was removed from the parent container is stored in this temporary variable. So let me just append the temporary variable to the other items to do items list, and this should add the new card which was dropped into the container. So let me copy the logic from the for the to do container to all other containers and then change the values. Alright, so the logic for adding and removing the cards is done. Before we go on to the build and check our progress, we go to the Kanban lane component. Since we have defined the set card function but not really defined it, so let's go over there and add the logic over here. So inside the set card logic, we'll take the last index of the items list which was passed over here, and if the container is not empty, we change the title of the items list object to the title that we are passing from the set card, and you have to append it with all the other data of the items variable. And since we have defined the set card over here and have the title as parameter, we have to go over to the card component and define the set card over here. So we can do this when we change the input so that it reflects back into the user's build and add the set card and pass the same title. So in order for us to know if the input field is present or not, let's add the autofocus into the input field. As you can see, the input field right now as expected, and when we drag and drop the Kanban components, it's not yet working. So let us debug this error. Alright, so to solve our error, let's go over to each component and review it. So over on the card component, let's check it from first. So we have all the properties that we require, and then we use the use draggable hook, and then we pass on the transform property to the style property, and then we handle all the clicks or the functions over here. We add the reference over here that we dereferenced from the use draggable hook. So the card component is fine. Let me move on to the Kanban lane component. So over on the Kanban lane component, we have passed the items title property and the add card property. Let's check. We have used the use droppable hook, but we have not yet used the set node ref. So that seems to be the problem. We have to pass the set node reference property into a container. So the container over here would be the div tag which is present just above the card component. We have to pass the reference, and now the Kanban bar would be able to work as expected. Yes, as you can see, we have built the Kanban board successfully by just using the DNDKit library. So now let's move over and start adding a new feature. The second feature would be to add Markdown support over on our build. In order for us to add Markdown support, we'd be using the Blocknote library, which is linked down in the description below. So first let us install this Blocknote library. Head on over to the documentation and install the Blocknote library. And once you install the library, you can go over and create an editor. First, let us import the block node view component, and then we'll use the use block node hook to create an editor. And we'll pass this editor constant into the block node view component. So let us import the block node view component and then pass the editor as the editor itself and then close it. Now once we compile this and we see in our clone application, we can see that we have added Markdown support, but you can notice that the width and the height are not the same. So let us go over here and change these properties to full width. Great. You can see, like Notion, we have support for Markdown, but also as a block-based editor. So let us add a heading over here. And this is purely possible by the awesome library BlockNode. Next, we'll go over and finish our application so that it's functional. In order for us to start binding the drawer data with the card instance, we have to go over to the card component and start adding some props which should be passed to the drawer component. So let me scroll down and add a few props to the drawer component over here. So since I have assign, status, created for and created at parameters, let me use them as a parameter names itself. So assign and then selected state and create for and then create at. Now along with this, we also have the title card, and also we require a function which we use to set these properties to the items list over on the Kanban board. So let me pass two props. One would be the title and then a function. Let me name it as add new card. So to pass the data to all these parameters, since we have a function over on Kanban laid, which is used to set new cards, so we'll pass data from Kanban lane component to the cards component. So we'll get the data as props inside the card component. So let me get them as props. So assign is a prop, selected state along with create for and create at. Now let's pass these data from the Kanban lane component. So since we are going to store all of this data inside the items list, I'll iterate these parameters from the items list itself, and then I'll pass it to the card component through props. So assign is from the assign props and the selected state, create for and the create at. For the title prop, we have the title over here on the Kanban card itself. So I'll pass this title variable over as props to the drawer, and let me create a function called add new card over on the card component, and then let me pass the data from the Kanban lane component. Now let's move on to the drawer component and then receive the props over here. Now we'll create separate useState hooks for each of these data, as we need to store these data from the input fields which is present in the drawer. So let me create a set state hook for the selected state, and then a useState hook for the assign variable, and then create for and then create at. Now we'll store the data from the input fields inside the drawer component. So the first input field over here, which is for the title. So let me just pass the value as title from the properties and then remove all the excess properties that we don't require. And the second one would be the assign parameter, inside which we pass either assign or the property that we require. So inside the value property, we either assign the variable from the set state hook or the prop. So we'll rename the props in order for us to differentiate between them. Let me just add a suffix of 1 to it. So either the prop should contain the value or the value must be entered by the user. In order for us to store the value inside the assign variable, we'll use the onChange function, inside which we'll use the set assign useState hook to store the value inside the assign property. Now for the next input field, we have the status. Now inside the status, we would want to dynamically change the value of the button based on the data that has been stored inside the selected status variable. So we'll either show the selected state, which should be converted to a string, or we show the selected state from the property which has been stored in the items list, or by default we can keep a placeholder value of choose status. Now inside the menu item on click function, we need to add another function. So let's make this as a function. And apart from the handle drop down button function, we need to pass the set selected state use state function to pass the value. So over here it would be not started. And likewise we need to do for all the remaining menu items. Then for the next input field created for, we'll pass the value either from the use state hook or from the props. And then in order for us to modify the create at variable on change function, and then use the set create at use state hook to pass the value of the input field. But actually this create at value and on change function should be for the create at parameter. So let me just quickly change that and modify it over here as well. Alright, so we'll go to our preview and check. So we'll quickly take all of these values and add them into one object and pass it to the Kanban lane. We can bind the drawer and the card instance together. So let me use a use effect hook over here so that I can change and store the values of the variables whenever they get updated. So inside the dependency list, let me pass the selected state, the assign, create for, and the create at properties, so that whenever any of these four input fields change, the use effect hook is executed, and inside the use effect hook, I have to check if at least any one of these properties are not null, and if any one at least is not null, we'll create an object with all the properties assign, selected state, create for, and create at. And in order for us to pass this card object to the card component, add new card function that we passed as a prop, and then we'll use the add new card and define it. So inside the add new card definition, we need to pass the title which is found in the card component and the card object which we receive from the drawer component, and combine them together and pass it on to the Kanban lane where the processing gets done. So to do that, we can use the setCard function which we pass from the Kanban lane component. So we'll just pass setCard and then receive a card object, and inside the setCard hook, let's pass the title as well as the new card object, and we'll go to the Kanban lane component where we have defined the setCard function. Inside the setCard function, we'll pass in another property called as card, and then we'll dereference all the properties from the card object. Once we dereference these properties, we'll pass it to the items list to store them such that the card component gets rendered with the data of the drawer component. Now let me just quickly go over to the props and then let me test it out. So the card title gets reflected into the drawer, but these components doesn't. So let me quickly go over to each component and review the code. So over on the card component, if you can see, I have the add new card function where I'm using the setCard function to pass the title and the card object separately, and over here I'm passing the title separately. Let me add them into one object so that it would be easy to pass the properties between them. Let me create a card object which is local to the function and pass in few properties like title, which will have the value of the input field, and rest of the properties as null. And then inside the setCard, let me pass in the same card object, since I'm going to change the setCard function over here to only accept one card object, since I find that that might be the problem where the drawer doesn't work. So I have changed the setCard to accept one parameter, and going back, let me add title into the dependency list so that every time the input field changes, the card object gets passed on to the Kanban lane. Let me quickly remove the title variable over here and pass in only the object. Since I am passing only the object into the setCard function, I need the add new card to be altered to also receive the title property as well. So let me head on over to the drawer component where we are passing the add new card function. Inside the add new card function, I'm passing the card object. So inside the card object, let me pass the title as well. Since I have two variables with the same name. Let me change the useState variable to title1 and then add a parameter to check if the title is not null, it gets inserted into our card object, and if the title1 is null initially, since we have defined in our useState hook, the title of the card would also become null. So we'll pass in the title from the props and modify it suitably. We also need to add the title1 into our dependency list and change the value inside our card to either title1. If that's null, pass in the title. So we'll go back from our drawer to the place where we have the add new card, which is over on the card, and inside the card we have defined the add new card function, to which we are passing the card object, and the card object is being passed on to setCard function. So we'll go over to the Kanban lane component where we are passing the setCard function. So inside the setCard function, let me dereference all these properties from the card object. So title1, assign, selected state, created for, and created at. Now inside the title property, let me pass in the title1 property and we're good to go. Now I noticed when we click on the add new button over here, we execute the add card function, which is defined on the board page. And inside the board page, the add card function requires a parameter. Since we are not really passing any parameter, it is blank to the user. So let us define a placeholder text over here so that it's intuitive. Enter a task. Now when you click on the add card button, you can see that the user is being prompted to enter a new task. And so once we modify that, we can check if the drawer is working. So let me just quickly go over and change the status and then drag and drop it another panel and check the drawer. So since it's not working, let me quickly debug this. So immediately when I come over to the Kanban lane, I can see that I have not yet added these properties into the items list. So I have not yet added them into the items list. So let me quickly do that. Now when I run it and check, it still doesn't seem to be working. Let me quickly go over to the page. So I think there might be a problem in how we passing the parameters to the drawer. So let me quickly go over to the card component, and over on the card component, we can see that the parameters that we pass on to the drawer are assign, selected state, and create for and create at. But if I go over to the drawer component, I can see that I'm passing the parameters and receiving the arguments as assign1, selected state1, and create for, all with a suffix of 1. So we must alter these named parameters to suit the arguments that we are receiving in the drawer component. Let me quickly add 1 to each parameter, and now when I run it and add a new card and add properties inside the drawer, so we can see that the title is now missing, but the properties are. So let me quickly go over there and debug it. So over here, the same mistake. I'm passing the arguments as title, but then sending it as title1. Let me quickly change that and add a title and drop it in another panel. As you can see, this seems to be working. So with this, we have come to the end of our application. We'll quickly have a rundown of everything that we have built right now. We can take a look at our design and confirm that we have created our application as per the design that we intended to create. So we have the Kanban lane, and then we have the Kanban lane, and then we have the Markdown view, and then we have the Markdown view. So from this we can see that it's so easy to build even complex application like a Notion clone using Locofy. Congratulations on completing the journey of building your Notion clone using React, DNDKit library, and Locofy. I'm glad that you chose to stick around till the end. I hope you got valuable insights into converting your Figma designs into fully functional applications. Your feedback is incredibly important to us, and we always appreciate your suggestions and ideas. Please feel free to drop your comments and suggestions below. We're always committed to continuously improve and deliver content that meets your needs. Lastly, remember that with Locofy, you have the power to build applications in no time. So, don't hesitate to build your next big project and leverage the capabilities of Locofy. The possibilities are literally endless. So stay inspired, keep learning, and happy building with Locofy.